Welcome everyone to our webinar today, Endpoints Uncensored, what works, what fails, and why it matters. Before we get into it, just want to go through a couple of housekeeping items. So special treat, we have a slide-free presentation today, so you're just going to kind of get to sit in and hear our conversation, but the recording will be shared. If, while listening to this, you have any questions that are burning in your mind, pop them in the Q&A. We will get to them at the end and really put our speakers in the hot seat. So speaking of that, let's meet our speakers today. I'll start quickly. My name is Libby Robinson. I lead up product marketing here at Field Effect, but I'm definitely not who you came to see here today. So let's introduce you to Matt Holland and Colin Belcourt. Two guys who I think love cybersecurity as much as they love sitting in bright lights and doing webinars. So I hear. Okay, so a little intro. Matt, we'll start with you. So Matt started his career at the Communication Security Establishment as a lead security researcher specializing in intelligence tradecraft and technology for key top secret, can't really talk about them, projects for the Five Eyes, later becoming one of the primary trainers of this craft therein. In 2007, he co-founded his first company and grew it to be another secret silent leader in the privatized intelligence industry, working with friendly governments across the world. This company was acquired in 2018 by L3. At that time, he made the switch and founded Field Effect. So as CEO here, he leads the vision and strategy of the company, bringing his cybersecurity and business expertise to the forefront to solve really hard problems in this space. Despite all that, we really can't get him out of the agent entirely, though. And so with his copious amounts of spare time away from leading the company, he also builds agent capabilities, which make use of his really deep technical understanding of what happens or should happen when malicious behavior is detected. Colin is also a CSE alum. He has over 20 years of experience in cybersecurity, running the gamut from developer work through really strategic technical advisor within the government and the private sector. I would say his specialty or superpower is leading programs that help organizations mitigate threats and really make informed decisions, which lead to a better cybersecurity posture. I once joked that, using our MDR is a little bit like having a Colin in your pocket. He didn't like that joke then. And I told him I would never use it again, but I definitely lied. But essentially, the key to sort of really strong, reliable, and scalable cybersecurity is having, and in this case, where we're going to focus in on the endpoint agent, but having an agent that has the intelligence of folks like Matt and Colin here, but acts in real time. Anything to add to your intros, guys, or did I spruce you up enough?
I feel like you covered it pretty well. I don't know what we're going to talk about for the rest of the, the webinar. Bit humbled.
Well, you're welcome. So on that note, I think it's safe to say that there are a lot of thoughts and opinions in this room on EDR and endpoint agents in general, and I promise you're going to hear some spicy takes here. So let's dive into it. We'll set the stage a little bit. So endpoint security is definitely all the rage. People focus in on endpoint security a lot when they're looking at their overall cybersecurity posture. So let's just take a step back and talk about why that is so, and why endpoints are such a sort of marquee part of your cybersecurity solution. Matt, why don't you start us off with that?
Sure. So, endpoint agents, they run on tangible assets. So things like phones, desktops, servers. These are the things that reside in an office all the way to inside somebody's pocket. So when it comes to protecting the interface from a human into an organization, the endpoint agent or the endpoint is that conduit. So that's where what a user is doing is most visible. It's a very big attack surface, and it's where a lot of things happen, often billions of events per minute. So it also makes it a very challenging thing to analyze and protect in real time. The other thing I think that people tend to overlook is the fact that this is where data tends to reside in an unencrypted fashion. Data that sits in a cloud, it's encrypted. Typically on servers, it's encrypted. So if you're an adversary or a bad guy that shows up on a network and goes to our cloud tenancy and tries to extract data from there, often you run into an encryption challenge when you're looking at it outside in. But on a desktop or a phone, it's sitting unencrypted. So you can think that when you're using iMessage, for example, you're reading the messages, but when they're on the wire, they're encrypted. Email sits on a desktop or via a web browser. That's unencrypted at that point when a user is viewing it. But when you look at it on the network, it is encrypted. So when you want to go after user-specific data, that's a fantastic spot to go after. So it's a bit of a weak point in a whole crypto model. Another reason is because users make a lot of mistakes. Not everybody's perfect. Some people click on links when they shouldn't. Bad things happen, and that's typically where ransomware will show up and execute. So it really is a combination of being an extremely busy location from the standpoint of what's happening on a network. It's that interface from a human into an organization, and it's a great landing spot for an attacker to show up and cause harm.
Thanks for that, Matt. Colin, what are your thoughts on why endpoints are such a key part of an overall cybersecurity solution?
Yeah, if you think of, you take a step back and you look at why somebody actually purchases a cybersecurity solution, they're trying to offload some of the risk, and they're trying to get someone else to come in and reduce the probability of a material impact to their business so that they can keep focusing on their business. So if you look at how you achieve that, you can, you really have to have a broad understanding of the whole organization and visibility into what's going on. And the key place where all that happens, and like Matt was saying, where people interface with their organization system is really through those endpoints, whether it's the workstations, the laptops that people are using, or the servers crunching data behind the scenes. So it's so important to really get that deep visibility into what's going on the endpoints themselves, so that you can then look at a broader security perspective and reduce the chances of something going bad within the organization's environment.
So realize I'm putting you guys on the spot here a little bit, but as it comes to endpoint agents, if you look at something maybe like the MITRE tactics and techniques, any sense of the percentage of those that really are endpoint specific?
So it's interesting if you think of a modern attack. I think a lot of threat actors are really trying to focus on identity. So getting a hold of somebody's credentials, and then you want to leverage those credentials to achieve their outcomes, whether that's collecting data or like a business impact on the organization to try and get ransomware, to extract funds from the organization. If you think of a lot of the identity management piece, we're kind of moving away in today's world from having, an Active Directory server on-prem with an endpoint agent. It's a lot more cloud identity solutions. But if you think of what a threat actor can achieve with those credentials, most of it is on the endpoint. So you can do business email compromise, which might not be, but basically everything else. So that's where all the data is stored. That's where the interface that people's documents are accessed through their workstation. So I'd say it's a pretty big portion of kind of the threat surface that ends up being on endpoint devices, whether phone, laptop, servers. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I think MITRE does a really good job capturing the general scope of what is known and what the majority of the world would experience when it comes to an endpoint attack. I think there is a gap, however, between what is known, i.e. what MITRE documents and categorizes, and what is actually possible. There's definitely lots of techniques that we test with internally that are not classified on MITRE, and that's just kind of the nature of the cybersecurity business from an attacker's perspective. They're always finding new things, new techniques, and it's quite difficult to keep up and categorize everything that's out there. So it kind of goes back into the philosophy of how you build an endpoint. Is it around capturing pinch points, regardless of what the technique looks like? There's specific things you need to do in order to detect certain things. Do you focus on that, or do you focus more on the higher level symptom, i.e. a hash of a file versus that a particular heuristic? I mean, it's a constant tug of war of which to really expend CPU cycles on.
Perfect. So actually building on that a little bit, you mentioned, things to consider as you're building an endpoint. So it may come as a surprise to some that not all endpoints are the same. It's not just about having an endpoint agent, or that's an endpoint agent in your solution, or an EDR, that they are not all built the same. So maybe we can spend a few minutes walking through what sort of separates endpoint agents, what makes a good endpoint agent great. Colin, why don't you start and walk us through some of the elements there?
Yeah, it's interesting. If you think of what makes an endpoint agent great, I think two key categories bubble up. I'm not really sure which one is at the top of the list. I'd be curious for your thoughts, Matt. But like performance and resilience are probably two of the big ones. So when you're looking at a business that's using devices to achieve their outcomes, like the last thing you want to do is put a solution on those systems that grinds it to a halt and makes it unusable and becomes frustrating and is really like introduces resistance to the employees from that organization doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, right? Like the beer maker needs to focus on making beer, and hospitals need to focus on their patients. They don't really want to slow things down because of a cybersecurity solution under the hood. So I think performance is exceptionally important, and it's something that you can easily get wrong. And if you don't kind of craft things and architect your solution in a way that has that in mind, I think it's really hard to step back from that afterwards. So I think that needs to be like a foundational principle. And then the other one is resilience, where you're working in a hostile environment as a security solution, where you have threat actors that are trying to get on the box and they're trying to disable your solution. They're trying to circumvent you, to tamper with your system. So you really have to manage for that. So the resilience piece of both like threat actors trying to tamper with you, but then also like the security vendors are operating in an environment where things change all the time. So there's constant updates, constant new techniques that are being detected. So you have to push out new policies, and you have to do that in a way that's not gonna, hamper the system or take things down or bring things offline. And there's so much complexity there that I think, both of those are actually fairly key elements. And you haven't even gotten into the, cybersecurity piece of protecting. But I'm curious what you think about that, Matt.
Yeah, so when it comes to performance versus resilience, I would definitely say resilience is the first thing, because performance leads to resilience generally. I tend to look at stability being resilience, and the stability of a host or an endpoint is first and foremost the thing you need to make sure you do not compromise when you're an endpoint author. So, grinding things to a halt, that is a performance related problem, but it really is creating the symptom is the stability of the host. So generally, I would order things stability, then performance, and then the efficacy of an endpoint. So, making sure that the user should not know there's an endpoint on the machine at any point unless something goes wrong. Then a pop-up occurs, or they're notified that there's something going wrong on the host. Performance leads right into that, and then efficacy, I would say, is the thing that the majority of the industry focuses on and tries to get right, because that's the future. That's the high-level marketing thing that people are buying. But if you aren't careful, you can easily screw up performance and stability in the pursuit of efficacy.
Yeah, totally agree. So I'd be curious what you think about efficacy. Like, what's the outcome you're achieving there, and how do you design an endpoint so that it can be efficient right from the start and effective? Yeah,
so I think it really depends on what the environment or the user is of the endpoint that you envision. For the past decade, EDR has been a thing. And if you look at what's inside an EDR agent versus what's inside an antivirus, 15 years ago, they're not actually that different. This is a industry analyst reclassification journey. And what an EDR agent does, if it's catering to an IT team, is it allows distributed command and control, automation at a larger scale. But the things that an endpoint is identifying and blocking has not really changed that much, regardless of what any vendor wants to say. So I think the efficacy really comes down to what you're trying to do. In our case, we built an endpoint agent that is purpose-built for MDR. So the characteristics of our agent are very in line with the fact that we have, a globally distributed SOC. We work with MSP partners and other partners to achieve a high quality security outcome. So we've prioritized things like it's okay maybe to not always capture the event in action, because the idea that an agent can be 100% certain is just, you'll never get there. But we prioritize the speed of enabling a SOC team when the agent can't make a decision, and how do you enhance the downstream analysis and give the ability for our team to reach back in and take action, to protect a customer. And it's been purpose built for that. But the industry, every endpoint out there is not all the same. There's endpoints that have been built 20 years ago. I'll just say Norton, Symantec, whatever they're called now, that was never built for MDR or to support a SOC. It was just a generic agent that evolved over time, and it's not the same as from a security outcome or from an interface outcome as modern EDR agents, and it's not the same as our agent or other MDR vendors, perhaps.
Yeah, totally agree. When I think of like endpoint security on a system, there's kind of two sides to it. There's the detection of a security event. So when an actor gets credentials and accesses a system, you want to be able to detect that really quickly. But then there's all the preventative piece too, like the protection piece, where you're collecting telemetry and then doing the analysis to see where the vulnerabilities are and reporting that as part of the MDR service, and kind of taking a more proactive approach to things as well. Curious on your thoughts between on the design of a good agent. In my mind, has to be able to support like both of those objectives. So like collecting all the raw data from a system and being able to filter out the noise and understand what's actually meaningful and evaluate some rules at that level to then be able to send that back. And then that like layered detection piece as well, right? So you're not always going to be able to send the rules kind of forward loaded to the endpoint, although that's kind of the gold standard. What you want to achieve for like security event detection, you want to make sure that the agent can almost act autonomously and, in a way that's not dependent on some back-end cloud system to be live. Otherwise, you're not going to block the security event or the malware to run. And I feel like our architecture enables that in a way that our analysts have access to different layers of security. But I'd be curious your thoughts on, the early design decisions for our endpoint to be able to have that built-in telemetry collection, the rules engine that's forward evaluated, but then the telemetry collection that gets sent to the back end and can do, further enrichments and further detections afterwards, including the proactive stuff.
Yeah, I think the general approach that we took is, you can imagine within an endpoint, you're dealing with billions of events a minute. And if you have to make decisions, you only want to make that decision once, and you want to bubble that up into the regular processing flow in an enriched form. And I know that sounds abstract, but you can imagine if an executable is dropped on a host and you've done full analysis on it, and how it would be executed, or the circumstances it would be executed in normally, bubbling that up so you only have to do that determination one time. So that allows runtime, higher level decision making within an endpoint's engine. Coupling that with, sometimes you just want that raw data feed and deciding what to send home, because you're never, like, part of building a good endpoint agent is supporting a structure of evolution. Nobody builds an agent, deploys it, and is like, good, we're in a spot where we never need to update this. There was one of our competitor CEOs recently that said, with AI, you're never going to have to update an agent again. And that is one of the most ludicrous things I've ever heard or read about endpoint agent technology, because it's just a constant evolution. I guarantee the agent that we have today, fast forward 5 years, the delta will be absolutely enormous. So you have to support a structure where you're getting enough data off the endpoint without grinding it to a halt, but it's meeting the needs of the analysts or the back-end analysis system. And sometimes you can't just open it up and do a full bore of everything. You'd love to have every file system activity, every event sent back. But I think, it's generally unknown how much volume that actually is. Okay, so how do you evolve an endpoint agent in order to detect those types of things, or update signatures to act on those types of events if you can't get it off the host? So the approach we've taken is, I think, a really smart way of runtime determination as to what is enrichable in what we send at the door. So even though we're filtering, billions of events a minute, we're not sending that all back. But when something seems mildly amiss, we will increase the amount of data or increase the aperture around a particular event or two and send that back. And that's enabled our analysts to build better detections over time, detections that are performant. That's a really key thing. You can't just throw an analytic up there onto the agent and expect it to operate well unless it's done in a smart way. And that we decided early on that this is where our agent, I say, is purpose built for MDR. We want to accomplish the tasks of every other EDR agent out there, but we always also want to empower our MDR team, and that's been a big part of it.
For sure. The caching piece, I think, is another aspect of that as well. So if the agent collects all the telemetry, tries to decide what makes sense, and sends back the signal, but then can also store more things locally, so that if we do find the needle in the haystack or something else that is of interest, we can go back and then pull the data, extra context from the time that it happened. So that layered data caching of relevant events is fairly interesting too, and that distributed model, which is pretty different than
that comes in handy when occasionally a boom does slip through and you're not dealing with the prevention of the boom, i.e. the attack. And you need to figure out root cause and quickly lock down a machine and figure out what went wrong. And again, back to the evolution of an agent, that is a really important attribute.
Yeah, for sure. Even when you do stop it and you want to go then and make sure that you really did and didn't miss anything, it's great to pull that extra context and just confirm that, yes, this incident was contained, there's nothing else going on here, and then make a decision whether or not a system needs to be reimaged or reset, or if you can just keep going and there's nothing else to miss.
Thanks for that. So we talked about things like, performance, liability. Matt, you touched on, the things that it detects hasn't really changed, but all the stuff around it has. So, we'd mentioned things like identifying vulnerabilities, filtering out noise, the ability to act autonomously, supporting evolution, context-based decision-making. So if we now, these are examples of things that would make an endpoint agent strong. Is it just the lack of these things that makes an endpoint agent weak, or are there other things? Or basically, I would love to hear your thoughts on when agents fall short. What are some pitfalls? Even looking back at your history, if you came across a weak endpoint agent, what made it weak and what did it look like to you?
The marketing materials. Joking, not joking. No, I think overconfidence is the root flaw that leads to problems with an endpoint agent. And I know that might be a boring, high level answer, but overconfidence either within the dev team, on the QA team. We saw an example last summer how overconfidence led to a worldwide outage. Overconfidence in a dev team, thinking that a particular technique, when it works, on my box or in the lab or on a small subset of machines, is good to go, or not respecting that. There's a whole industry out there, ransomware industry, state-sponsored intelligence, organized crime, that are all trying to get around what you're building. So the idea that you're ever stuck in one place, or you're confident in what you have. It's fine to be confident, but as soon as you mix in overconfidence or hubris, that's where culturally decisions start to be made that don't benefit the quality of the agent, the quality of a security layer on top of it, and that's the biggest thing I would say where things go wrong, is when people get too happy with where technology is or what an endpoint agent is, and they stop learning and stop evolving.
So interesting. Colin, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And I think losing sight of the fact that you're operating in a hostile environment as well. I think there's a recent example back in at the start of the year where there was a security vendor that had a flaw in their installation process that would actually disable the anti-tampering features during an install. And if you just stopped halfway through an upgrade, then you were effectively just neutering the agent, and then a threat actor can do whatever they want. So some great research goes into those types of detections, but I think it makes you realize how you really can't screw up when you're designing these things, and you really can't lose sight of the fact that it's not just about making your code work and your detections work. It's about doing it in a way that's not going to impact the system, that's going to be resilient against, threat actors trying to shut you down and trying to circumvent, because you're basically the one standing in the way between, someone with malicious intent trying to steal data or, encrypt systems, and, the business continuing to run without even noticing. So.
We talked a little bit, I'd like to follow up. We talked a little bit about some of the mistakes that we have seen that have had pretty significant outcomes on businesses in the industry. Do you guys think that we're learning from that in the space? Colin, why don't you share your thoughts first?
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely always opportunities to learn. And I think if you have the mindset that you already know what you're doing, you don't really need to understand the environment and grow and rethink some of your assumptions, then I think you're going to stagnate pretty quickly. So I think it's always important to kind of reflect on what's happening. When some of these big incidents happen, internally, the first thing you do is think oh, could this happen to us? And then, you'd pull in the group of people and start talking through how we've implemented something and whether or not we're also susceptible. Thankfully, all those conversations end pretty well where we had already thought of it and it's not really an issue. But it's always good to have that kind of gut check and always maintain that grounding into, reality and the environment that we're in. I think the other piece for learning isn't so much about, what others are doing, but looking at our own system. So something that maybe we haven't covered so much today is the diagnostics piece. So we collect so much telemetry, not just about the endpoint and the activity that's happening, but also our agent, and we bring that home. And then we've got, a team of people that are just looking at that all the time, trying to find issues with, the code that we're deploying or features that we've deployed in read-only mode just to see how it's working. And we can assess, crash dumps on systems that are typically not our fault. It's always, something else in the system that went wrong. But we have that mindset of always checking and confirming and making sure that, we're operating in a way that we want to be within the environment, and kind of learning, seeing where the bottlenecks are, and kind of enhancing based off of that.
Perfect. Matt, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I generally don't pay too much attention to what our competitors are doing or other endpoint companies are doing. The focus on what we're doing is more important. I think at broad, the industry, after some big events, Microsoft got some CEOs together, talked about some things. Not sure how that landed. There was a nice blog post afterwards, but there's not really been any broad changes to the industry. So is the industry learning? I'm not really sure. Could Microsoft actually make changes that are meaningful? I think in a lot of cases, it's not actually Microsoft's fault. So do they necessarily need to change? One of the cool things about the Windows operating systems is it's pretty open. You can do things. You can actually achieve better endpoint agent security outcomes on Windows. I could rant for hours about Mac OS and the endpoint security API and how generally not great it is, or the options on Linux. Just again, not near as powerful as Windows, but just a touch, I guess, and build on what Colin was saying. Every endpoint agent, every team out there, if you don't acknowledge that it's a journey and it's an evolution, when you're building an endpoint, you're not going to have success. And when we built ours originally 10 years ago, we started with a diagnostics framework that Colin was talking about that allows us to look for problems and compatibilities. And fast forward, 10 years later, we're operating on millions of machines. We automatically upgrade our agent, but every time we do it, we look for all the potential issues that are happening. We have, I think, a 99.998 success rate on the last upgrade, but we just didn't get there out of the gates. There was problems, and there's constant iteration and inspection of when things go wrong. And when things go wrong, I think, is what you actually need to pay attention to more as an endpoint agent team, because that's the canary in the coal mine, that there's a problem. Could be an incompatibility with third-party software. It could be an incompatibility with a stealth feature update that Microsoft has put out there. I can think of 3 times over the past 2 years where Microsoft has made a operating system change, and we detected it based on our diagnostics ahead of time before it was, Microsoft did the full rollout. And you can't really change the nature of the beast. That is what the world of operating large-scale endpoint agent networks actually is. The fact that, I would say that diagnostics piece is absolutely critical. It's why I think the most successful EDR companies right now are where they're at, is because they probably had a similar mechanism of figuring out where problems were, fix it once, and iterate and make it better. And it could be a stability problem. It could be a performance problem. It could be an incompatibility with third-party software. And you can't predict these things. You cannot reproduce these things in the lab. So you have to be ready in the wild for when they occur.
Makes sense to me. Thank you. All right. So some of us have definitely heard your spicy takes on marketing, marketing buzzwords. Would be curious to know, and Matt, obviously I'm going to start with you, be curious to know, not to say that if a company uses this buzzword, then automatically it's BS, but what are some buzzwords that cause you to sort of be like, oh, you know what, if you're looking at this, do a bit more homework, or buzzwords that kind of give you the mega eye rolly reaction? What are your thoughts there?
I like how you choose the grumpy guy first. Like, Colin's quite delightful, and you go with the grumpy old man.
I know my audience.
Yeah, I think two areas. The first, I don't think the industry really understands what NGAV is yet. That is not clearly defined. There's different takes on what that is, and typically you read the definition from vendor websites as opposed to a really clear definition of what it is. I'm not saying that people don't have next generation antiviruses. In my mind, it is combining really good static signature detections, be it hashes or YAR rules with phenomenal heuristics on a host. Like, I think that is realistically what that means. It's just, I think the mix in with AI confidence and how that fits in, it's nebulous to the point where I don't trust it when I read it. That leads me to the second bit is, how much people lean into the AI contributing to an endpoint agent. And let me be clear, it is evolving incredibly fast. We use it internally in both development and also in our production systems and in our analytics and whatnot. And it is evolving so crazy. It's really cool to see. However, there's an undeniable data problem that resides with endpoint agent technology. In order to train AI, you need the data. And the juicy bits of data are infeasible to remove off endpoints at scale in order to train a model that cares about lower level events. I'm not talking about process activity or network activity. What if malware doesn't create a process? What if it gets off the network in a different way than the standard network? Perhaps a Bluetooth connection or something like that. I challenge the assertion that an AI-based or powered agent is any better than a traditional approach to writing endpoint agents, which, as we talked about earlier, stability and performance are key. AI today runs in giant clusters, giant powerhouse machines, and that's not what the average computer is. So there's the training problem, and then also the data or the performance problem.
And I think you may have written a rage blog about that people. Colin, any buzzwords that get your spidey senses tingling?
Yeah, the same two ones came to mind. NGAV, just because the word is just so ugly and
it's offensive.
NGAV, it just sounds so harsh. And what is it really? It's people were laughing at static signatures about how it's only effective for known malware. And then they said, okay, well, this is like that, but it's better because it's heuristics, but then it's still fixed point in time. And I think the real challenge is just that signature management piece and being able to update things at scale and learn and adapt as things change. I think NGAV on its own definitely kind of rubs me the wrong way. And then AI, I wonder how much, if you think of the perspective of where the world is going with some of our solutions, we're definitely trying to just, get AI to solve a whole bunch of things. So, you want to write some code, well, just throw it all of the code you have already and then try and get it to spit out some code that's somewhat similar. And if you look at that performance angle that we were talking about from the endpoint, you're not going to be able to write the same level of detections that you can, on process startup, you can evaluate a whole bunch of rules and then block just the thing that matters based on fundamental first principles of what happens on an operating system. AI takes such a different approach to all of that, where you have to, give it loads and loads and loads of data that it'll crunch and then try and come out with a summary, but it's just not effective at all. And I think it's not an effective thing to replace like the human expertise going into that rule definition. I think augmenting and complementing and kind of guiding an analyst or a security expert into defining those things is much better. I actually really like the co-pilot term for some of the AI solutions, where it really is that co-pilot. It's like something on the side that's helping out the security expert kind of codify their practices rather than taking things over. So yeah, whenever you hear of like agent-based AI system that'll just do all the things for you and you don't have to worry about it, I definitely squirm a bit.
So now I know if I want to irritate you guys, I can make a couple of fake marketing assets with a bunch of those words in there and just scatter that throughout and ask you for a review. Awesome. Okay. Before we move on to the Q&A section here, would love to ask you guys for each of your sort of quick final thoughts. If there was really one thing that you wanted the audience to walk away with today, what would that be? Colin, I'll start with you.
Marketing is awesome. So I think the one thing I'd want people to take away, an endpoint agent and building that component of a more holistic security solution that looks at all the different perspectives isn't something that's quick and easy and you can just whip together a team and in a few months have something that you can deploy at scale and achieve the same security outcomes. I think you really have to approach it and build it from the ground up with that security mindset, with the right team of people. It doesn't have to be big. Like our team internally of developers is quite small compared to any of our competitors. But I think when you're taking that meticulous approach, you're thinking through the performance implications, the outcomes you're looking to achieve. You're thinking through that resilience and making sure that you can operate in that environment and maintain things. I think that's really, really key, and it takes time to kind of get there.
Matt, what is the one thing that you'd want people to come away with today?
I think the courage to and the confidence to ask questions about the background of the endpoint agent that you're looking to acquire in general. I probe beyond the marketing materials. I joke about them simply because there's a lot of hyperbolic marketing out there, and it makes me grumpy. One question in particular I think that is worth asking is what's the background of the endpoint agent team that has built the endpoint agent, and that stems simply from the fact that I've been doing this for 25 years, and a good endpoint agent coder has a lot of experience in building it and has built several of them, different types. And it's not something that I think you can just pick up out of school. I don't mean to harp on new grads, but in my experience, the best endpoint agent coders are those who have been doing it for 20 to 30 years, or perhaps even longer, who have made mistakes and learned about what works and doesn't work. Understanding the environment, operating system knowledge is so important. And if you don't understand, if you're a Linux coder or a Linux endpoint agent author, and you haven't spent 20 years with the Linux operating system, then why is the assumption that you will write a good endpoint agent? Just in general, like it's not going to turn out as you would hope. So I think in summary, what's the background of the endpoint agent team? How well do they know operating systems? And what's their experience in regards to how many endpoint agents have they written? Because if you ask ChatGPT to spit out an endpoint agent, I'm quite certain it is not near as good as what people who've been doing it for 30 years can actually put together, because they've made those mistakes, and they're trained based on real life experience doing really, really hard things, as opposed to trained on publicly available endpoint agent code that is rather mediocre.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts today, guys, and your time with us. We've had a few questions come in here, so let's jump to the Q&A section. So we talked about early on sort of the performance and the reliability, that kind of thing. And one of the questions is essentially, how can you provide good performance and efficacy while still being lightweight?
It's an ongoing evolution. It's not something that you don't build an endpoint agent, get it perfect the first time, and it goes back to the importance of having that diagnostics framework and measuring the performance impact that you have on a host and consequently on a fleet of hosts. So I can use an example right now. We've been operating an EDR agent for years. We have tens of thousands of policies around process execution, what they can and can't do. We're in the process of evaluating, okay, how do we go from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands? Because that's the next 15, 20 years. And also we want to open up policies to partners. We want our partners to write their own EDR policies. And I'm just realizing I might have just stepped in it a little bit there. But it's a big thing. So we're evaluating that. And that actually, I knew this would happen. So but ahead, I always get in trouble with marketing, so I'm keeping a list this year. So thus far, I talked about an RMM too early, told partners about an AV coming in 2025. So now I got to add a third one on there, talking about partners and EDR policies. I'm sorry. Colin can answer the next one.
Okay, so let's move on to the next question here. So so one of the things that we talked about was kind of the blue screen. Some people refer to it as blowing up the internet. And we talked about the kernel and stuff. So one of the questions that came in prior was, if you are installed in the kernel, how do you ensure you don't blue screen?
I feel like I definitely want your math perspective on this too, but I'd say you leverage a whole lot of experience on what it takes to write kernel level code that doesn't blow up the system. So thinking like mechanisms and putting mechanisms in place like the crash protection, detecting the fact that there's maybe a boot loop, and pulling back in that scenario so that you don't keep loading your driver just in case it is you. Doing structured exception handling in a way that you can catch all of the issues that you didn't really think about, and then making sure that your team codes defensively and that you're actually testing things across all the different environments, all the different flavors of Windows, all the different permutations of the various deployment kind of layouts and configuration that you might have, and just making sure that it works ahead of time. And then pairing that with a slow, gradual rollout process for anything that touches the kernel. But to be honest, I think it goes beyond just kernel code for that, where even just the performance of your agent generally, you really want to make sure that you're monitoring things, you're rolling it out slowly, you're being deliberate and thoughtful and careful in your kind of rollout strategy with all that. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Matt.
Yeah, that's a really, really good summary. I think the only thing I would add is the development philosophy of the team behind it. Do they have experience? Have they been writing kernel code for a really long time? And if the answer is yes to that, you would know that you write a significant amount of code in that fault detection infrastructure. So when an exception occurs, pull back as much context as you can around that to quickly get that salt in the next iteration of the agent. And the general philosophy around assume something is going to go wrong. So that's why things like crash protection in the kernel agents, that's something we've had. I think it was one of the first features we put in there, a decade ago, to make sure that if we crash during startup, when our driver starts, or during operations, we are aware of the root cause and can quickly resolve it and get a fix out. And thus far, knock on wood, it's been good. Everybody knock on wood.
With the noise around agentic AI, and I'm assuming that I am pronouncing that correctly and that you guys know what that is. With the noise around agentic AI, how has Field Effect looked at implementing agentic capability into your endpoint agent?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think a lot of people have limited understanding of what AI means in the modern kind of framework and how things are evolving really quickly. And if you think of a security solution, you have to be really careful in the way that you operate in an environment, and you want to make sure that like we were talking about earlier, you want to limit the impact, you want to limit the load on any system that you're running. And I think we have a very deliberate approach to collecting telemetry, to evaluating rules, to understanding what's going on a system. And I think the last thing you want to do is just throw an agentic agent out on the endpoint, collecting telemetry from the system at will. So I think the way we have our endpoint capabilities, the forward loaded piece that actually runs on an endpoint, evaluates rules, collects telemetry, sends stuff back home. I don't think you'd want any kind of agentic capability running on the endpoints. I think where we tend to leverage like more modern like models to do analysis and evaluation and kind of distilling a scenario is more with the backend data that gets pulled to our operational network. So I'd say the agentic capabilities aren't so much just on the endpoint perspective, it's more just on the back end. And I think one of the advantages with like our solution in that space is that it's not just the agent, it's the agent with a network sensor combined with cloud data, our external threat surface, like all those different perspectives in visibility into an organization collected from all those diverse sensors. And then all of our, like not just agentic capabilities, but even the machine learning models that we've built for a really long time now, like this isn't really something new for us, that are looking at that data and aggregation, I think is where all that power lies. But
yeah, I think the only area where I would say, we probably in the near term use, I think, agentic AI in the context of how the world looks at it. Our agent can measure all the memory that it uses. We're always aware of what our memory loads are. We're always aware of what our CPU loads are, and that comes down to the agent's process, the driver. So we have a very a broad awareness as to what our impact is on a given host. Agentic AI is something that we've been looking at using to throw all that performance data instead of writing a bunch of Python analytics to look for just anomalies that would normally be caught by handwritten analytics. Agentic AI would be something that I think would do a pretty good job of just here's all the performance data, look for anomalies that we're not quite expecting or coding for.
On top of the diagnostics in the back end, I think it's super useful.
What plans does Field Effect have around enabling workflow management for clients when the endpoint detects an issue?
Oh, definitely. Happy to take that one. I might need the whiteboard again.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to have to add it later then. So one thing we've got coming is a remediation workflow that can be utilized in a fully automated fashion or in a way where a partner or a customer can basically define the actions they want to take when something bad happens. And it's obviously going to be a gradual rollout and learn as we go. But that'll be coming in Q3, which quite excited about.
Talking about acronyms and everything, this is one we tend to get asked quite often. What is the difference between SIEM and Field Effect NDR? It's a pretty common one.
If you look at the SIEM strategy, it's basically you take telemetry from diverse solutions that are probably very different. They don't speak the same language. You just aggregate all of that in a back-end system, and then you can have some rules sitting on top of that, and you have the data accessible in a way that an analyst could explore, write queries, try and pull out some meaning out of the information that's there. And you typically get that log retention piece as well. So if you're trying to do retrospective analysis, something may have happened, you want to go back, you can pull the logs out of a SIEM. That's useful for large enterprises that have like mature security teams and they can understand the data in its raw form and they're able to pull that out of these types of solutions and make informed decisions on what to do next. I think for a lot of like small and medium businesses, which is kind of the place that we tend to focus. A lot of organizations of that size don't really have the capacity for their IT team to be able to look through those logs and actually make sense of it and write those analytics. So I think when you're looking at a managed detection and response solution, the Field Effect approach is to have a team of security analysts that have been doing this for a really long time and have that security background and perspective from multiple organizations, and they're looking at data in a way that's not just back-end telemetry trying to do some queries, but actually feeding things back into the system as well. So like, if you think of our analysts that uncover a new threat or a new type of security event on a system and want to write a detection for that, it's not just a back-end analytic thing. We can write new policies quickly and push them out, similar to what Matt added to the whiteboard for our partners. Like we do that today internally. And I think that direct feedback loop that's changing the behavior and the detection on the endpoint agents rather than just looking at backend telemetry and trying to, play catch up from the event that actually happened on the system at some point before that, is a pretty, different approach in general from just, looking at a scene.
I have nothing to add. That was a great answer.
Colin gets all the points for that one then. I'm definitely keeping score. We can talk about it. We'll talk about it after.
I feel like I'm already minus.
Okay, so this one is a good one. So you guys mentioned buzzwords that that we should be aware of and thinking about, and ones that kind of make your skin crawl a little bit. And it definitely is tough for people that are out there evaluating when they're trying to sift through what is buzzword versus regular. So, question is, what questions should I be asking to properly evaluate an EDR endpoint solution?
I'd say the first one is, is an EDR endpoint solution the only thing you need in terms of your security stack, or like what are the actual security outcomes that you're looking for your organization? And then maybe shop for a security solution that'll cover those outcomes rather than just like jumping to all I need is the one EDR solution. So maybe asking yourself some questions about that to start. And then I think the next one is whether you want a solution that is like managed, so you've got a team of experts behind it, or if it's something that you have the capacity to kind of run with internally. So do you want just a collection of sensors that you can then evaluate the output of those sensors and determine whether or not you need to do something and kind of distill that down? Or are you shopping for a solution that's managed, where you have a team of analysts that are going to do that triage? They're going to be looking at the security events. They're going to be looking proactively at what are the risks in the environment and trying to remediate those ahead of time before you get to boom. So I think that's one big question right up front is what style of security solution are you looking for? Do you want to be really hands-on, or are you trying to like outsource some of that risk to a team that has maybe broader perspective? And I think it's very different when you think even the smartest security analyst that works for, say, a medium-sized organization, team of one or two, and they'll be heroes. And you can get some really, really, really smart people in that role. But the challenge is at 2 a.m. on a Saturday evening, what does that look like when you have one person deep in terms of being able to handle some of those things? So when you're looking at a managed solution, how important is it to you to have real 24/7 coverage with a team of security experts that are at their best at all times? Kind of awake and alert and monitoring an environment versus someone that is going to have to go to sleep at some point. So I think questions around that, like even the security, if you're trying to evaluate different MDR solutions, is it, many vendors will claim 24/7, but are they saying 24/7 because their analytic engine is running all the time? Or is it 24/7 because they have, humans that are awake and ready to jump in? And, even Matt, I'd be curious your thoughts. I've heard you mention before on our posture of doing the follow the sun model with like analysts that are around the globe, and how different that is.
Yeah, that's I think a big differentiator. Like who do you want dealing with the worst possible outcomes? You want really good people, and really good people generally don't want to work from midnight until 8 a.m. The other thing I'd maybe add to the answer is, when you're looking for an EDR or an agent solution, like what matters most to you? Do you want really great dashboards? Do you want as many alerts as possible? Well, what's the value you're looking for there? Or do you want something that's more higher level actionable outcome? And I think over the years we've seen lots of different opinions as to what matters most for a particular organization or a particular MSP. But if you can really ground on what matters most and how that affects your business, whether you're an MSP or whether you're buying through another way, or if you're a standalone business, like what's the outcome you're looking for, and use that as an input into buying EDRs more than or an endpoint agent more than the marketing materials or what Gartner is saying on any particular month or year.
EDR, MDR, and XDR. What's the difference, and where does field effect fall into, or which does field effect fall into?
I'll take a first crack at this because for years we had a challenge when speaking with industry analysts as to what we are, and because most MDR vendors do not build as much technology as we do or provide as much as the technology stack as we do. Obviously, EDR vendors just focus on endpoints and then try to monetize and soak customers for as many EDR features as possible. We're not that. I can say right out of the gate. But I think there's an interesting crossover between MDR, which is what we market, what we sell, what we're excited about, but also the feature capabilities of what XDR is supposed to be. Now, XDR is typically, people look at it as a framework that you plug third-party tech into, but at a high level, we are the technology stack and more of what people would expect XDR to be, but a managed level that you would get out of a high quality premium MDR service. So I think where we've seen industry analysts land is we're kind of in this weird category that doesn't quite exist yet, and people have called us managed XDR. We don't typically use that because often people follow up with, what does that mean? And then you get into a 5-minute verbose answer like I just gave. So from a capability standpoint, we're definitely lining up with XDR Plus, but from I think a customer experience standpoint, we are an MDR company.
The focus is managed, XDR or, MDR in general. But I'd say even our endpoint capabilities are not just, an afterthought. Like, I think that's definitely something that we've invested in. And even with the MITRE Ingenuity evaluation that we did, it was pretty obvious that our EDR capabilities that we've built aren't, secondary. And it's not like, even just a standalone EDR solution is still really, really good. But you're going to get better security outcomes, with a broader perspective.
Yeah, I think my comment around the EDR thing is we're not an EDR vendor that is trying to monetize an endpoint agent as much as we can. Like when you get Field Effect MDR, you get our endpoint agent and you get all the features that come with that endpoint agent. We're not trying to, upsell around removable drive blocking. We're not trying to upsell around this feature and that feature. We just feel the best outcome for partners and customers is the best possible security that we can deliver. That's that simple.
I don't think we could end on a higher note than that. So as I say, we will follow up. We'll address the rest of the questions in here. Thanks everybody for attending, for taking time out of your day. Thanks you guys for sharing your thoughts. And thanks for the active discussion and questions here. So have a great rest of day to everybody online and hope to speak to you soon.